All right, welcome back. So today, we're going to tackle a really cool idea. What if we could draw a single, unified map for the entire world of logic? It's a journey into a new way of thinking about the very foundations of how we reason. So, let's start with a question. When you think about logic, what's the first thing that pops into your head? For most of us, it's pretty black and white, right? Something is either true or it's false. End of story. But is that really the whole picture? What if that simple binary way of looking at things is actually, holding us back? See, the first thing we've got to get our heads around is that there isn't just one single logic with a capital L. It's more like a whole universe of different logical systems, and each one has its own rules, its own purposes, and they're all designed for totally different kinds of reasoning. And believe me, this landscape is incredibly diverse. I mean, you've got modal logics, which are all about possibility and necessity, what could be true versus what must be true. Then there are three-valued logics that throw unknown into the mix, which is super useful. There are even these things called paraconsistent logics, which are wild. They're built to handle contradictions without the entire system just collapsing. It's this huge, sprawling world out there. So that brings us to the central challenge, right? You've got all these different, seemingly incompatible systems. How on earth do you connect them all? Is there any way to find some common ground, to organize this untamed wilderness of reasoning into one single coherent map? Well, to find that answer, we need to dig into a kind of hidden rule, an assumption that's quietly shaped a ton of modern logic. Think of it like a bottleneck in our thinking. It's often called the Fregean bottleneck. Okay, so at the very heart of this bottleneck is something called Frege's principle. And the idea is pretty simple, but it has huge consequences. It basically argues that the only thing that matters about a sentence is whether it's true or false. That's it. So all true sentences just get lumped together under the label true, and all false ones get labeled false. All the rich, juicy meaning behind the actual words, that gets completely stripped away. This is a perfect analogy for the problem. Imagine that food critic. They tell you nothing about the flavor, the texture, the ambition of the chef, just edible or inedible. That is exactly what Frege's principle does to language. It just flattens everything down to the super simple, but honestly, not very useful binary. And here's a crystal clear example. Look at these two sentences. Paris is the capital of France. Okay, that's about geography. Electrons have a negative charge. That's physics. Totally different worlds, right? But in classical Fregean logic, since they're both true, the system says they have the exact same meaning, true. And just like that, all that important context and nuance is poof, gone. So how do we get out of this bottleneck? This is where a really powerful alternative comes into play. It's a non-Fregean framework, and its whole purpose is to rethink that fundamental rule and, crucially, to bring meaning back into the equation. And this whole new approach can be broken down into three key moves. It's pretty straightforward. First, you just reject Frege's principle outright. Second, you introduce this new concept called semantic correlates. And third, you create a new way of comparing sentences, something called non-Fregean equivalence. Okay, so what in the world are these semantic correlates? Honestly, it's a fancy term for a simple idea. Just think of them as the actual stuff a sentence is about. The content, the situation, the fact it's describing. So instead of just asking, is it true, we can now ask, what is this sentence actually about? And that simple little shift changes everything. It brings the focus right back where it belongs, on the meaning. And this is the real game changer, because once we start focusing on these semantic correlates, we suddenly have the ability to reason about the actual substance of what we're saying. We can finally compare what two different sentences mean, not just whether they're true or false. And that is such a richer, more powerful way to think about things. Okay, so with this new tool set, we can finally build that map we were talking about. This non-Fregean framework gives us a way to chart the entire world of logic, and we can finally see how all those different, weird systems actually relate to each other. And just look at how comprehensive this map is. We can finally put classical logics on the same page as descriptive logics. And that whole range of non-classical systems we mentioned earlier, modal, three-valued, paraconsistent, you name it, they all find a place. They all have a home within this one single unified structure. It's awesome. So what we end up with is exactly what we were looking for, a single unified framework. We now have one big inclusive system that lets us really dig in and examine the similarities and differences between all these logics in a way that actually makes sense. That untamed wilderness, it's finally been charted.
Okay, I know this all might sound a little abstract, but stick with me, because having this grand unified map has some really profound implications. Being able to see the big picture like this, it gives us some incredible new power.
I mean, this map unlocks a ton of stuff. It gives us a much deeper understanding of language itself and even how our own minds work. It gives us a tool to compare the really deep philosophical ideas baked into different kinds of logic. And it even makes these logical systems more powerful because now we can reason directly about meaning itself, not just truth. So, at the end of the day, this isn't just some academic exercise in organizing things, like the librarian arranging books on a shelf. No, this is about a fundamental shift in how we see things. It's about getting right to the heart of one of the biggest questions there is. What does it even mean for something to have meaning? And that leaves us with one last big idea to chew on. We just saw how a single hidden rule, that Fregean bottleneck, shaped our entire view of logic for decades. So if we can remap something as fundamental as the rules of reasoning, it makes you wonder, right? What other unseen rules, what other hidden assumptions are shaping our world right now, just waiting for someone to come along and challenge them?